So Vegeta and Frieza have always been heavily connected, but just how connected are they? And why is that connection important to modern Dragon Ball? Well, that's the discussion today. We're essentially just going to be pointing out some things and talking about some things that happened during Dragon Ball Z that leads to what's going on today in Dragon Ball Super, and why Vegeta and Frieza's relationship is so important to the overall narrative of Dragon Ball Super right now. So let's just jump straight into it. So one of the most common themes that Akira Toriyama played on when it came to villains, especially during the Dragon Ball Z era, is the past. So most of the villains that Goku fights are a representation of the past in Dragon Ball Z. This is, of course, to reflect the fact that most of the villains that Sun Wukong fought in Journey to the West were also a reflection of not only his past, but his actions and how they affected the past. Now, Frieza, as we all know, destroyed Planet Vegeta because he was scared of the Saiyans as a whole and of the Super Saiyan and Super Saiyan God. He was essentially afraid of losing his place in the hierarchy of this survival of the fittest system that Dragon Ball lives by on an intergalactic level. He was essentially afraid of losing his top spot on the food chain as the most advanced and evolved being in Universe 7. He wanted to rule the universe, and he also wanted to be the most superior being in the universe. That kind of sounds familiar. It's almost like each villain builds onto the next villain in Dragon Ball and leads to the next villain, and they all have very similar character traits. And this is something that I've heard the community talk about a lot, the fact that villains have these things in common. And there's a greater reason for all of these villains to be similar, but the main reason is because Dragon Ball is a allegory for martial arts, and all of these characters reflect the negative character traits, very similar to the Crane Hermit in the original Dragon Ball. Basically, the ideals that martial arts themselves look down on, being egotistical, having a superiority complex, trying to push your idea of justice onto other people. All of the villains in Dragon Ball are themed around negative character traits within the context of martial arts. Now, another really cool thing about all of the villains in Dragon Ball is that they all also reflect the negative character traits that Sun Wukong showed us in Journey to the West as an extension of that, because he as a character is also treated as an example of what not to do in not only martial arts but within the spiritual context. So that's the reason that all of these villains, and I've talked about this on my channel before, have a lot in common with Sun Wukong. Vegeta and Frieza particularly both want to rule everything. They both want immortality. They both want to be the superior life form in the universe. And all of these things are character traits that Sun Wukong himself had. And the villains that he would later face also had these character traits, because it's, again, essentially sort of like he's facing a past version of himself. Now, the way Toriyama crescendoed this effect all throughout Dragon Ball Z is very well done, and that's really what I want to talk about when it comes to the connection between Vegeta and Frieza, because their relationship and their connection, there are things about it that people tend to overlook. Now, one of the first things I want you to realize when thinking about the commonality in terms of characterization between Frieza and Vegeta is the fact that Frieza as a whole and King Cold from the very beginning have always been a representation of the evil of the Saiyans. Essentially, the evil traits of the Saiyans coming back to bite them later on after they've conquered countless planets, started taking advantage of being a dominant species in the universe. You know, lo and behold, here comes another more dominant species to not only take over their business and boss them around and use them to their advantage, but later destroy them and completely wipe them from existence. So, Frieza, his stated reason for doing this is, like I said before, he was afraid of being surpassed as the top of the food chain. Okay, he wanted an empire, he wanted to keep that empire to himself, and he wanted to be the top of the food chain. Now, this is not an uncommon character trait in Dragon Ball villains, but one of the most overlooked aspects of Vegeta's introduction and how that fed into the introduction of Frieza later is this little interaction between Nappa and Vegeta. Now, Nappa suggests that they start a new Saiyan empire on planet Earth, and Vegeta says, "Do you really want a bunch of brats more powerful than us running around that could endanger our rule, our stability, our needs," right? So, who does that sound like? I mean, just really sit and think about it for a minute. That's Frieza. I mean, I know we're talking about Vegeta, but that idea, that mindset, comes from Frieza. So, you know, the Saiyans already sort of naturally developed this mindset as they became egotistical, felt as though they were superior to other beings. They sort of developed that attitude naturally. But this just goes to show you, like I said, Frieza has a deeper connection with Vegeta than people like to give him credit for. So like I said earlier, most of these villains are a representation of characters that represent the past in Dragon Ball. And Goku, like I said, he has to deal with this a lot. Raditz is literally his brother coming in to remind him of his past, and then Vegeta is also there to come in and remind him of his past, and then Frieza as well. Goku is literally there to rectify the past against Frieza. As a matter of fact, ever since Goku was introduced to Raditz, the entire build-up is centered around Goku eventually working his way through Raditz, Nappa, and Vegeta, the Ginyu Force, etc. All of these characters who were directly responsible for what happened to Planet Vegeta, he is slowly running the gauntlet through all of them until he gets to the top dog, which is part of the reason that the Namek saga is so amazing. So another really interesting thing to think about and to point out here is the fact that Vegeta was perfectly fine with Frieza wiping out the Saiyans. Now, I want you to realize how important this is. Vegeta did not care about his planet, his friends, or his parents. He says this himself. Now, I've explained in previous videos why. It's because they didn't live up to his expectations, his prideful expectations as to what the Saiyans should be, which feeds into his role as a possible God of Destruction candidate, because it sort of shows his standard for mortals. But it's very important to realize that this false sense of Saiyan pride that Vegeta has is associated with the same pride that Frieza has that caused him to want to destroy the Saiyan race. Frieza and Vegeta are heavily connected in the Namek saga in this way because they are reflections of each other. They're both going from village to village, taking the Dragon Balls. Both their goals are to make themselves immortal through the Dragon Balls by the end of the arc, and they both want to be the superior life form in Universe 7. They want to be the top of the food chain. They are extremely, extremely similar in that way. Now, the way Toriyama played on this was absolutely amazing, because Goku, he faces Raditz, he faces Vegeta, he faces Nappa, he faces all these characters who are ingrained into his past, and he didn't even realize it because he was on Earth the whole time, but he's essentially facing the past. Vegeta is facing his past and his own demons in the form of Frieza. And that is the reason that Frieza and Vegeta are way more heavily connected than people give them credit for. Everybody sees the iconic scene play out between Goku and Frieza, and they just associate Goku and Frieza with one another, and they don't think about how heavily connected Vegeta and Frieza are. In fact, Goku was just the catalyst for the pride that Vegeta had for his race to be used correctly to take down Frieza. So Vegeta had a huge part in Frieza being defeated. The only missing ingredient he had was Goku's identity as an Earthling. That was the missing ingredient he needed to be successful against Frieza. And this is sort of hinted at again in Return of Frieza, where instead of practicing Budo like he should, Vegeta gets punished for practicing principles that are counterproductive to the ideas of martial arts. Instead of being like Goku was on Namek as a Super Saiyan, he chose to do things in a completely different way. He chose to humiliate Frieza in a completely different way, in a way that did not play on his psychological need to stay on the top of the food chain, but instead robbed him of it. So essentially, Vegeta made a huge mistake. He doesn't understand that martial arts and Budo, the concept that Goku practices, has a great effect on the villains and enemies that he comes into contact with, in the form of challenging their need to be the most superior life form in the universe, and causing them to practice martial arts in order to feed that need, which causes them to slowly develop into a better being. So Goku is indirectly and naturally playing a psychological game with all of these villains that he comes into contact with, and Vegeta just fails at that in every way, because when he comes in, he essentially has the opposite effect. When he goes to rob a villain of their opportunity to achieve their ends, it strengthens their resolve in what they want to achieve. We see this happen countless times in the series, and they really, really made it a point to show us this whenever Vegeta was facing Granola in Super for that reason. They want you to see that that's sort of the effect that Vegeta has on characters in contrast to Goku. So essentially, Vegeta facing Frieza and losing is Vegeta facing his demons and failing to defeat them. That's essentially what he's doing. Frieza is a literal representation of his demons and of the things that the Saiyans did that were wrong, and he fails to destroy that part of himself and recreate himself. Okay? Whereas Goku, he succeeds in that. He succeeds in being a completely new being worthy and capable of defeating Frieza due to his upbringing on Earth. In that sense, all three characters are way more connected than people give them credit for. Now, fast forward all the way to Super, and I'm convinced that the entire reason this scene exists is to replicate what happened in Return of Frieza in the manga, because the manga did not cover the events of Return of Frieza. But we've got this scene where Vegeta essentially tells Moro that he's not a naive fool, and that essentially he's just basically reiterating to us the same point that he made to us at the end of Z in the Buu saga, that he enjoys killing opponents, and that he does it because he feels it's the right thing to do, despite, you know, whether or not anyone else agrees. Even if the universe deems it wrong, that he enjoys destroying evil. Not destroying evil, but more specifically enjoying destroying evil is the sin that Vegeta is committing in these scenarios. Because as a Budo practitioner and as a martial artist, you're not supposed to do things with your feelings and with your conscious thoughts in that way. You're supposed to just naturally, when you kill someone, you do it in one blow without any malicious intentions. And whenever you tame your ego, your own malicious thoughts, your own malicious intentions, in the name of becoming stronger as a martial artist. And that's where Goku's mercy comes from throughout the series. So, why is this important? Because Ultra Ego and the path that they are putting Vegeta down complements the issue that Vegeta had on Namek and rectifies it directly. And what I mean by that is, so for example, even prior to Namek, Vegeta got completely mentally shattered when he faced Frieza in a way that he didn't against Goku. Now, don't get me wrong, he did get mentally shattered against Goku as well, but not in the way he did against Frieza. Frieza completely demoralized him. Now, one way to determine the huge difference between how Vegeta has developed as of late in Super in comparison to Dragon Ball Z is the fact that in Dragon Ball Z, anytime Vegeta got into danger, two great examples, like I said, are Goku and Frieza, he would freak out. And he would go into flight mode instead of fight mode. Okay? So you can sort of think of Ultra Ego Vegeta as Vegeta going into fight mode. Almost to a detriment on his part. Because, as we saw against Granola, due to the fact that he is so predatorial and aggressive in this fight state, that he can take too much damage. And essentially, you know, that can become a detriment in a combat situation. Just like in real life, whenever an animal is super hopped up on adrenaline, their heart is going, and they're just attacking, they can hurt themselves, and they're just, you know, they don't care because they believe that just staying in fight instead of being in flight is their best chance of survival. So essentially, the transition from Dragon Ball Z to Dragon Ball Super is Vegeta, whenever his life is in danger and he sees blood for the first time against Goku, he goes into a flight mode. He's ready to retreat, and if he's not going to retreat, he's going to use the one self-defense mechanism that he has as a species to give himself the advantage, and that was the Great Ape State. So essentially, Toriyama is playing on natural biological themes, very animal-like themes with these characters. Very Darwin-centric ideas and themes, due to the fact that a lot of these characters are animal-themed or alien-themed, and aliens are supposed to be the result of a higher form of evolution. So Toriyama was thinking about this in a very biological way. If you contrast the reaction that Vegeta had with Goku, where he's freaking out because he's bleeding, and then the reaction that he had against Granola, where he's enjoying the feeling with being in danger, and you know, he enjoys seeing himself go into this fight or flight state. Instead of being scared and going into a flight state, he's embracing the situation and using it to become stronger and using his fight to come out on top and try and defeat Granola. So that scene is purposely there to contrast Vegeta from Dragon Ball Z. That's the entire purpose of that scene. And that's not the only scene like that. The scene where Vegeta is demoralized against Frieza in the Namek saga, his interaction with Frieza in ROF, is also there to contrast that. But it's also there to contrast the interaction that Goku had with Frieza as a Super Saiyan, because Vegeta fails as a Super Saiyan Blue against Frieza because, again, he just doesn't understand how Goku is so successful yet. He doesn't understand that Goku naturally, by nature, practices Budo due to being raised by Grandpa Gohan and taught by Roshi, and that is the reason, despite the fact that Vegeta thinks that he's foolish sometimes for having mercy or waiting to the last minute to wipe out his opponent. Vegeta doesn't realize that those principles that Roshi taught him and that Grandpa Gohan ingrained into him are the reason that he's so successful. And he's stubbornly practicing his own principles over and over and over again until eventually he can find some merit in them. And that's essentially what's happening with Ultra Ego. Ultra Ego and the Destroyers, the entire purpose of them is to preach the necessity of destruction, the necessity of the ego, the necessity of the identity. It's all there to completely contrast the themes that Goku and Whis represent, which are the importance of a naturally good moral instinct, and also the practices of taming the ego and not allowing it to dominate your conscious thoughts. So Beerus and Whis and Goku and Vegeta are very dualistic in this way, and they both represent two aspects of psychology that are very important in martial arts. And the way this is being built up, it's being built up to essentially have Vegeta finally destroy and rectify his inner demons, which Frieza is a representation of. And this is something that they also played on with Frieza himself in the Granola arc. I talked about this in one of my previous videos about the Heaters, but essentially if you look at the Heaters' personality traits, they are very, very similar to the personality traits that Frieza himself has discarded in the name of practicing Budo and martial arts in order to be successful. So essentially, Frieza has experienced a corrupted form of the Goku effect. He, unlike Vegeta, like I just said just a few seconds ago, does understand what makes Goku successful. The difference is that he is going to exploit it for his own ends. He doesn't just want to get stronger like Vegeta. He has ulterior motives. So, in that way, despite the fact that Frieza has a one-up on Vegeta right now, in the sense that he knows how to essentially change the balance of the universe and shift it into his favor through being an anti-Goku, in a sense, Vegeta does have the advantage in the sense that his intentions are more pure than Frieza's at this point. Frieza has an issue. Despite the fact that he has figured out what makes Goku successful, if he stops practicing that in the name of some selfish goal, he'll stop being successful. Because at that point, he's going back on, the effect that Goku has had on him, and he will no longer be benefiting from those practices that he's picked up from Goku. Whereas Vegeta has no motivation to go back on those ideas. If anything, he is just learning more and more and more and becoming more comfortable with having pride as a martial artist rather than being prideful in himself in a selfish way. So, essentially, it's a race between the two and a contest to see who can practice Budo the best and the longest to come out on top. Whoever practices martial arts correctly the longest will come out on top between Vegeta and Frieza. And in that way, if Vegeta can successfully do this, he will not only have metaphorically tamed his demons, he will have literally tamed his demons. Literally and metaphorically. So, this build-up between Vegeta and Frieza that they're doing, there's a huge reason behind it. Like I said, Vegeta and Frieza are way more connected than people give them credit for. And Frieza, as I've talked about in my previous videos, is being built up to being a character who is irredeemable and is essentially a character who needs to be erased. Because he's already died, he's already refused to be reincarnated, he even openly stated that he has no intentions of changing his evil ways, and so they are clearly building up to a huge payoff for Vegeta and a huge, essentially ending to his arc as a character in the form of conquering, taming, and destroying his demons, who Frieza is partially a representation of, and his Saiyan nature, etc., etc., etc. And I just think that the connection between Frieza and Vegeta is not talked about enough, and I think it's a very underrated concept. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.